academic policy evidence to inform kind of policy making in the UK. And by UK, we mean all of the devolved administrations, we mean local authorities, we mean combined authorities, or now strategic authorities. And we do have colleagues as well who do things a bit further afield than the United Kingdom as well. But it's a network of over 110 universities. We've got 6 subcommittees that focus on kind of key areas of academic policy engagement, everything from training and development to regions and nations and devolved administrations. But obviously this one, specifically looking at the areas of research interest. And there have been 2 previous sets of co-chairs of the ARI subcommittee that I don't know whether they're on the call, but they're very important. But this is us. So Rob Davies, who's based at Closer in UCL, Nicky Buckley at the University of Cambridge, and myself, Rich Pickford at Nottingham Trent University. So the next slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit about who we are and what we do. So we, I don't know whether was it clever, Robin and Nicky, we put ourselves forward to help run the subcommittee. So we're all co-chairs of this ARIs Research Interest Subcommittee at UPEN, which is made up of interested people, really, who want to know more about ARIs, have had a passion or engagement with ARIs, or think that they can do more and want to take more out of them. So we hold a space really to talk about this really interesting kind of tool and process and activity that was set up, and I won't steal Rob's thunder by talking about the history, but what we're looking at is how do we best utilize them, how do we recognize and share and talk about them, but also how do we think about how they can be used both in the future and how they can evolve and adapt. And there's lots of stories about how they have developed and evolved that Rob will take you through. So our role is about holding a space and being part of that connective infrastructure really between those people who need evidence and those people who produce evidence, and understanding that navigation space to do that. So next slide, and I believe it's the last one from me. Oh no, it's not. Straight to Rob. There you go.
Cool. Thanks so much, Rich. So yeah, as Rich says, I'm going to do a little bit about the past, present, and kind of a bit of a teaser about the future of areas of research interest. But I wanted to start this bit off by just talking a little bit about the power of saying I don't know. So as you can see here, this is a quote from David, and I do encourage you to watch his videos or read the book. But as he says, I don't know are the most important words any leader can say. It opens the door to learning. It's part of leadership theory. They're very powerful words. If you're leading a team, quite often specialists, experts, civil servants, parliamentary staff, members of parliament, etc., are kind of expected almost to have all of the answers and to know everything. But we don't and they don't. So saying I don't know is incredibly powerful. If you think about policy organizations, they often say I don't know, so they often put out calls for evidence. So government consultations is a government saying I don't know, tell us what you know. Parliamentary inquiries in UK Parliament, the Senate and the Scottish Parliament and beyond are also ways of saying I don't know. In terms of government consultations, parliamentary committees, inquiries, when you actually look at it historically, of who responds to these calls for evidence, academics, individual academics, and the research community as a whole have often been underrepresented. Basically, they're not engaging. You don't see individual academics responding to these consultations. It's more kind of think tanks and lobby groups and others with specialist interests, but not academics and the research community. So one of the drivers behind areas of research interest was basically creating a bespoke vehicle to deal with that issue for researchers to mobilize their research in the policy landscape. So what are ARIs? As you can see there, they're basically fundamentally a statement of a topic, a policy topic, or specific research questions, which policy organisations, governments, parliaments, local councils, combined authorities are asking for more evidence to inform their policies and basically help close the evidence policy gap. As you can see there, ARIs to date have been published by a range of policy bodies, UK government departments, parliamentary committees in the UK Parliament and also the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd, and also kind of on the regional level, regional authorities and local councils. So I'm just going to take you through a bit of kind of a history lesson. So what this slide shows you is basically where kind of the idea of ARIs started. So if you look across the top, this is a kind of snapshot. We'll go into a little bit more detail on this in a few minutes. So if you look at the UK government, you can see a report there, which I'll come on to a bit, in 2015, and then in 2017, ARI is starting to be published. You jump forward to 2023, and a database was created. More on that a bit later. And then, as you can see, more ARIs have been published since, and others have been refreshed. If you look to the UK Parliament, the second one down, there was a report in 2019, which then, as you can see, led to ARIs and also a hub, a kind of database as well. Welsh Parliament, slightly later on from all of those, as you can see in kind of 2021, another report, another driver, and then ARIs and a ARIs hub published from 2022 onwards. And then in more recent years, got local governments, so kind of regional bodies. We're seeing more and more regional bodies publishing ARIs, seeing the benefit of developing ARIs and using it as a mechanism to engage with academics and the research community. So a little bit more detail on UK government. So in 2015, Sir Paul Nurse was commissioned, published a review, basically looking at the research and innovation landscape. And one of the recommendations that came out of that review was for the UK government departments to publish what Nurse called statements of need. So the reason behind this, so Nurse basically said that there needed to be an articulation. Government departments needed to do better in terms of articulating their research priorities and their research needs, not just for the research community, for individual academics to understand them and engage with them, inform them with their evidence and their research, but also for research funders to kind of better align. So to help them better align the bids that they put out. The commissions, the specs that they put out, align them with kind of live policy questions, basically. So a couple of years later, we saw the first UK government department ARIs published. And since then, several have been published and refreshed as well. As I said, in 2023, Government Office Science and ESRC worked together to create the ARI database. More on that a little bit later in this session. And just I've got there in 2024 and more recently as well, in the last kind of couple of months of this year, there's been new ARIs from the Treasury, HMRC, the Food Standards Agency, and Office for Statistic Regulation as well. So not just central government departments, but also non-departmental public bodies as well, and agencies publishing ARIs. So that's where the kind of UK government came from. You can see the driver, the Nurse review, and then the journey that they've taken. In terms of the UK Parliament, so I mentioned a report. That report was the 2019 Liaison Committee report. Apologies if everyone knows what the Liaison Committee is, but for those who don't know, it's a committee, a scrutiny committee in the UK Parliament. It consists of all of the chairs of the other committees. So, for example, the Health and Social Care Committee chair is on the Liaison Committee. Some of you, they look at kind of a lot of kind of strategic kind of, or what I call strategic level inquiries. you may have come across them in the news, if anyone actually watches the news anymore. They're the committee that questions the Prime Minister, which is often quite a high-profile session. So the liaison committee picked up on this idea of ARIs in the context of parliamentary committees, the scrutiny system. And they said that basically, similar to Nurse's recommendation, that committees need to be a bit more strategic and needed to deal with the kind of underrepresentativeness of academics in the research community in terms of engaging with their inquiries, responding to their inquiries. Again, think tanks, kind of lobby groups, and those were, tended to respond to inquiries. So that was a recommendation, and there was a plan to kick off a pilot of parliamentary committee ARIs. 2020, we had the COVID-19 pandemic, so that changed plans a little bit, but they still drove forward UK Parliament with COVID-19 ARIs and created an expert database from the academics and researchers that were responding to that, which was incredibly beneficial for Parliament and the work that they were doing during that time. Jump forward to 2021, and the pilot of parliamentary committee ARIs was started. As you can see there, a hub was created, a kind of central hub by the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology to hold all of them. And as you can see, the Business and Trade Committee there last year published an ARI on AI regulation. And then finishing it off with, in terms of parliaments, Welsh Parliament. Again, there was a driver, the Sturby report in 2021, again found that academics were underrepresented in terms of responses to committee inquiries, and they decided to, like the UK Parliament, to do a pilot of committee ARIs. And they created a hub as well. And then you can see a more recent ARI, the Economy, Trade and Rural Affairs Committee, on AI and the Welsh economy, AI being a big policy topic at the moment. And then finally, in terms of the history lesson, I mentioned regional bodies, local councils. In 2022, Leeds City Council trialled their ARIs. Have since refreshed them a couple of times, and there's a new refresh, I think, or just a recent refresh to reflect the Best City Ambition priorities. And you can see there are others. This is just a snapshot. This doesn't cover everyone, but you can see the North of Tyne Council published ARIs, and Newcastle City Council began working on ARIs as well a couple of years back. And there are more and more combined authorities and kind of local councils who are realizing the benefit of ARIs. So how are they used? Like I said at the kickoff, they're basically a statement of evidence needs. That's the simple kind of point of ARIs. But they're used as a vehicle to raise awareness about research priorities and to help fill evidence gaps. They're quite often used, put here, as a kind of a conversation starter. So basically a kind of opening, something to kind of, close the gap and build bridges between policy organisations, whether government departments or committees, and the research community. And as I said at the beginning, this is a bespoke vehicle that's been created for the research community to engage with policy discussions and policy conversations. They're also a tool for organisations to get beyond the usual suspects. So I mentioned the drivers for the reports for the various ARIs in government departments and parliaments as well. In terms of the kind of evaluation, which Nicky will talk about a little bit later, in many cases, they've been a very effective tool to get beyond the usual suspects. So new voices engaging with and contributing to government calls for evidence and parliamentary inquiries. So this slide here, it comes from, as you can see, it comes from a report written by Max and Melissa, who I think are on the call. Hi, Max. Hi, Melissa. From ARIs, A Practical Guide, which was launched at the end of last year. And what this illustrates basically is, various kind of ways that organizations can basically get knowledge, get evidence, where they need it. You can see there's ARIs, lit review, consultation, a commission, or an inquiry, and also fellowships and directly contracting research. And as you can see, I think this slide is really helpful. This image is really helpful in seeing the kind of utility of ARIs in terms of helping to get clarity on research priorities, better understand new and emerging issues, but there are also other ways to do it as well. So ARIs aren't the only answer to that, but yeah, a very useful tool, not just for the policy organisation to use as a kind of journey on their journey to understand their evidence needs, but also, a bespoke vehicle for academics and research community to engage with these conversations as well. And that's why they're so important, not just for the policy and the research community, but also the funder community. So for the policy community, as I've said already, it is a really, policy organisations have found it a really helpful tool to identify and articulate their evidence needs and get new voices contributing as well. For the research community, it's a bespoke vehicle, and as you can see here, I've put a low burden vehicle. So responding to government consultations, committee inquiries takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of resource. The timings for these are quite short as well, tend to be quite short, particularly when you're thinking of kind of academic timelines, which tend to be slightly longer. These are rapid kind of responses, whereas ARIs, I've found in my experience as a kind of evidence producer, they're a much easier kind of low burden, quicker way to engage with and inform and shape policy. For individual researchers and research centres, it's a really good way to increase your visibility in delivery. By delivery, I mean government and local councils, regional bodies, and scrutiny bodies, so parliaments, particularly for early career researchers. And when you think about grant applications and academic outputs, it's a really useful way to demonstrate the policy relevance. So you're saying, I want to investigate, X, and this government department or this parliamentary committee is explicitly calling for evidence in this area. So it really does help to kind of make the case for your research. And then for funders, I've talked about the kind of helping to better align their grant specs and what policy organisations actually need. And I've put an example there. There's a recent NIHR call specifically related to the DHSE ARIs, one of those, and also for peer reviewers as well. When you're reviewing grant bid applications, it's really helpful in terms of being able to see the policy relevance of what's there to say, oh, actually, this is answering a kind of a real world question. So just very briefly, I talked about the pilots in UK Parliament and the CENEF. So I'm just going to cover those very quickly. So basically, UK Parliament wanted to trial different formats of ARIs to see what works, to fundamentally make it easier for the research community to engage with their work. And fundamentally, the driver behind this was to try and increase the diversity of research expertise feeding into the scrutiny process. And as you can see there, those were the pilot ARIs, so kind of broad topic areas. They were incredibly successful, and it's one of the reasons that committees carried on, either kept their ARIs open or carried on and used them as part of the scrutiny toolbox. In terms of the CENEF, which was slightly later, if you remember, they wanted to get a greater understanding of the research that was out there and also what was planned. Receive input in terms of the potential scrutiny areas that they could ask the Welsh Government, and get in terms of a kind of map, understand who was working on these topic areas, and again that driver reaching out beyond the usual suspects. And as you can see, those were the pilot ARIs, with many more published since then. And this is just to kind of illustrate, so, you know, don't take it from me. Yeah, just a few quotes here to demonstrate the value of ARIs to this organization in terms of diversifying the evidence received, filling knowledge gaps, and basically being part of that kind of scrutiny toolbox. So along with, you know, official inquiries, and, you know, conversations, getting input from, you know, various kind of vehicles. Yeah, it's part of that scrutiny toolbox to get the best evidence into parliamentary scrutiny. Thanks so much. Over to you, Nicky.
Great. So I'm going to speak a bit about how you can now move on to exploring how to develop ARIs and how to respond to them. So I know there are people on the call who are both working for policy organisations as well as researchers and knowledge brokers. So the Government Office for Science central guidance for central government departments and to some extent for the non-departmental public bodies, there are some really useful tools about the process of writing and using areas of research interest. So if you use the titles of any of these reports on these 3 images, you'll Google those and you'll find those links. And that talks through the process and some of the good practices in creating areas of research interest. The middle image is the guide that Rob referred to already that our colleagues at Northumbria University published at the end of last year. This was based on experience of using areas of research interest, either at combined authority or local authority level, but also drawing on experiences from the Senedd and elsewhere, as Rob said. So we found that a really practical guide. It's got sort of blank worksheets you might work through about the process of developing areas of research interest and the sort of mobilization activities to put around areas of research interest. So the process of just publishing them is not going to be enough for a policy organisation. You're going to be consideration of workshops, of outreach to particular academic communities, the idea of like, what is a policy organisation open to? Are they open to secondments? Are they open to student projects? Some universities in the last couple of years have attached small bits of funding, impact funding, to getting work done to mobilise knowledge in response to some of these ARIs. So you can read a bit about that in that guide. And then you might also like to consult a report from last year from UCL from an event held with their Festival of Engineering called ARI Live. So a great thing that we've seen is that many organisations publishing ARIs have created events. We've seen these from central government departments, so DWP, Department for Education, have been good at doing roadshows and webinars and so on. And this one was kind of fostered by UCL, but brought in people from central government departments who had ARIs relevant to artificial intelligence. And then what was interesting about this method in many, many ways was to use AI tools as well. So the sorts of things we're familiar with using kind of voice to speech capture, getting kind of live report written during the event itself, and then that was edited, but also the capturing of images based on the kind of information that researchers were sharing in response to some of the AI ARIs that were used at that event. So that's a write-up of that method. So really what we would like to encourage researchers and knowledge brokers to do as a result of today is to use the next kind of couple of slides and the information on those to see about ways you might go forward with this. So in the minute, I'll go on to the next slide, which shows you a bit about how the ARI database works. As the others said, at the moment, that's restricted to some central government departments and to some of the non-departmental public bodies, but it ultimately, I think the aspiration is it will take in more of the ARIs that are published around the country and by compliance authorities, local authorities, and so on. We'll look at that in a minute. Something to say is that it's a mix of policy organisations using online forms and email inboxes to get input on their ARIs. So even email inboxes is a kind of development forward. You know, a lot of people say, gosh, this government department, I don't even know where's a shared email inbox I would email if I wanted to get hold of or make a comment on a strategy that's published. Well, all of the ARIs have at least a shared email inbox at the end that you can reach out to if you say, I think researchers in our group have something that we could contribute on this, or we're going to mention this in our next grant application. But you might like to see that some of them use forms, and these can be short to respond to. So the government departments, Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, and also Department of Culture, Media and Sport have used forms to build up a kind of Excel spreadsheet behind the scenes of expertise that they can draw on. And this is a plug for the policy briefing note that the Closer, where Rob works, have created. So this is a very nice template that if you want to get some practice in how to put research into a form that is attractive and come up with kind of a short summary that you would make a nice policy briefing note, then do use that. So if we go to the next slide, that shows what the ARI database looks like. I don't know if it's progressing for you. Yes. So I found this very useful, is that you wouldn't necessarily know whether your research area aligns with Department for Transport or Department for Work and Pensions or Home Office or another body. So you can use a keyword and then it will pull up different examples. So here's one on exploitation. I did this on robotics recently for a researcher, and it brought up some really interesting departments. So those all have dates attached to them. They have the link through to where they were originally published, and then you can see how you can get hold of either the email inbox or the survey that would be the result of that. And so the next one is to go to the other sources of information. As Rob said, if you want to look for UK Parliament ARIs, there's fewer of these. At any one time, there might only be 1 or 2 active. So do remember that you can also search for parliamentary calls for evidence, for select committee inquiries, of which there'll be many more at any one time. The Senate have been pretty active at keeping up with their ARIs, so do have a look at them, and they're really keen to hear from researchers right across the UK. And then we're developing a list of the regional and local ARIs because there's no repository of them all at the moment. So here's an example of one for Leeds, but we're hoping on the UPEN site to have an initial listing as a holding place. So we're working with several combined authorities at the moment. We'll go to the next one. It's a real question as to kind of evaluate ARIs and see how they're being used. And it was a tremendous idea for transparency and clarity to kind of make these statements of research need available. But I think we're all just finding out what processes do you need to put in place to make the most of what was initially just a kind of publication of research needs. So there are a few accounts I've shared on this slide of people who've worked in these organisations writing about how they've used them. So there's an account of how the Senate have used them. There's an account from the 2 ARI fellows who worked with several central government departments based in Ghost Science for several years, Annette Boaz and Catherine Oliver. They did some interviews both with academics and with policy officials about the use of ARIs. And there are some accounts within the practical guide that came from Northumbria University. But I think it's fair to say that it's behind the scenes. You have maybe policy officials super busy who have got an email inbox with lots and lots of things in it. I have experience myself of sending inquiries in and having them forwarded on, certainly. So saying, I've got a researcher who's planning to do something on this. Would this interest a policy team? And I found that the analysis team and the central government department have handed on to the relevant policy team who've kind of come back to me and let me know if there's already some work going on in that area or whether it would be of interest. But there's not a lot that's published to kind of analyse as a whole, I think, because some of this is sort of within some government departments to kind of contemplate like how much use and resource they've been able to put to this sort of thing. So we do kind of think that we should try to do something from our end, from academia's end, to account for case studies of academics who've used ARIs in their grant applications. They've referred to them and they've got all the way to the end of a grant and they've now recorded policy engagement and impacts as well. So myself and another member of the ARI subcommittee are currently following up for some case studies from academics to ask whether they found that engaging with the ARIs was useful at grant application. Did they continue throughout the life cycle of the grant and towards the end? So anybody who's interested in evaluating ARIs, and certainly some of the practical experiences at a local level, will be super interesting to us. So where next for ARIs? There are a whole load of refreshes that we've heard about coming out kind of this spring and into summer. with the change of government last year, with the spending review happening just now, there seems to be a kind of wave of refreshing them. So if you watch out UPEN events, we quite often have webinars to launch new ARIs from central government. So some of this has like chief scientific advisor or someone from the department speaking, as well as like a lead analyst taking us through some of the areas they're interested in. So yeah, to keep subscribed to UPEN's newsletter, which is a way of hearing about those. So they'll be publicised in print and you can link through to them, obviously, if you don't attend the webinar as well. And then with support from Research England and the ESRC, UPEN is working over the next 3 years to help combined authorities and local authorities and other local bodies create areas of research interest and to create activity around it, whether by workshops, the possibility of applying for secondments and those sorts of things. So we are engaged with a few combined authorities already. We're going to put more publicity into the UPEN newsletter and as well then to reaching out directly to some combined authorities, local authorities. I know HDRCs are on this call. Find out what's going on and find out where, again, some extra input from UPEN could be useful. So that's just kicking off this spring and we'll have more information to come out on that soon. Yeah, I think in a minute I'm going to hand back to Rich and just to say, we think that submitting written evidence to a consultation or ARI is something that you should think about within a portfolio of activities you could do as a researcher or knowledge broker. But, you know, there are various slides that appear like this with a plethora of ideas. And I think as you sort of map your stakeholders and you map your possible routes to impact, have a think about this one. Does an ARI exist in the kind of area where you would want to be sharing knowledge? What other activities can you do around that as well? So yeah, with that, I will hand back to Rich to take questions, etc.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, there's the QR code to sign up and hear about those information. If you want to get in touch with us, the best way is via the Secretariat email, and follow us on LinkedIn. Maybe less so on X because it's not as active. We might need to revisit that slide, but open to questions, comments, thoughts, reflections from those of you who've listened to us. Thanks very much for giving us the time to share our thoughts and ideas around ARIs. But if we use the standard model of raised hands, we'll go from there. And obviously, if you want to raise it in a question in the chat, we can go there. But yeah, first up, Francisca. And I think
well, thank you very much for all the additional information on ARIs that I wasn't aware of. So we've actually identified one that we're really interested in as a group, and we also know who published it, but we're not entirely sure how to find out who within that organization to contact. That's been surprisingly difficult. Do you have any tips on that?
Did you try was it a shared email inbox at the end or?
It was just like an organization and they had published quite a number, but it didn't give any details at who within the organization had published what. And getting through to the right person has been proving challenging over the last few months. So that's why I was wondering whether you have any ideas on that.
Well, Francisca, you're in the same institution as me, so I'm happy to have a conversation offline, see if we can be any help.
Okay, well, many thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's always worth remembering that these are, when they're released, often static documents. They become static documents. So it's worth the challenge, obviously, and I won't pick on any government civil servants who are here in the room. I know there are a few I've seen, but they are created. They take a long time to create. They're quite involved processes. They require lots of negotiation. Sometimes the questions get answered quite quickly and sometimes they don't. And I know colleagues from the Ministry of Justice have done some really good work developing something called closure statements, which just are highlight when a ARI question they think has been answered or answered to the level that they needed it answered for. And the challenge is always well, who did write that? Because these are collaborative, co-produced documents across government departments or at a local authority or a regional level. So sometimes it might actually be quite difficult to find out who suggested that in the first place. But generally, it depends on the department, but there should be either a shared inbox or an opportunity to engage. But as Nicky said, there are ways and means that we can do to support you, and that's part of what UPEN's all about. And your knowledge broker, academic connectors within institutions are also a good space to go there. But let's go to, I think, Mark, you're next.
So yeah, hi, I'm Mark Plumley from University of Surrey.